Kao što rekoh i ne porekoh, žene će vas zgazit crvi proklete kukavice. Vi mizogisti, koji mrzite žene, koji imate male piše, koji ste nikakvi jadni i bjedni, pa mi žene ćemo vas gazit kod crve. Znači, odvjetnik Apšenove žrtve daje ekskluzivu o sljedećem potezu kako će srušiti osuđenog silovatelja i pedofilčinu Trumpovu. Let's go!
Managing partner of the Bloom law firm and has also represented and continues to represent close to a dozen Epstein-Maxwell survivors. Welcome, Eric. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
I know this is a very busy time for you and there's a lot of different avenues to pursue, but my first question is, after the hearing with Pam Bondi and how absolutely disrespectful and deplorable she was, how did that leave the victims feeling? Or survivors?
Žalostno,
I'm
čuj
not
ove
even
kak
sure I could
prevode
call that a
užas.
hearing. I mean, to me, that was just like an extended temper tantrum by Pam Bondi. I don't know how else to describe that. It was so bizarre. And what's so strange about this is, for the past couple months or so, I've been, almost giving them, the Department of Justice, the benefit of the doubt and saying this is probably just pure incompetence. No way they are intending to disrespect the survivors. No way they're just intending to protect the potential co-conspirators and the potential co-abusers. But after that hearing, when Pam Bondi wouldn't even look at them, I mean, not even, not apologize. This administration is not a very apology-oriented administration, to say the least, but not even to give them the respect of looking at them in the eye, acknowledging their existence, acknowledging what they've been through. Just a temper tantrum. I mean, just yelling and pointing fingers and insulting. I'm at the point where I have no other reasonable explanation that this is a cover-up. There is zero disregard for the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein.
Isto koji DORH što zataškava stvari. Imat ćete na svojim rukama nevine.
Protecting their friends. I don't know what other possible conclusion you could come to after viewing that. And for the survivors, it's the same thing. What's so unfortunate about this is something they're used to. Right? They have been wronged, they have been disrespected, they have been exploited, they have been victimized and re-victimized since the 90s. I mean, way back from the from the Maria Farmer complaint that went to nothing with the FBI, to the Alex Acosta deal that I could speak hours about, how that was a travesty of injustice and allowed Epstein to continue to abuse, to Jeffrey Epstein being able to kill himself while in federal custody somehow, and then of course Ghislaine Maxwell being convicted and then being transferred to a minimum security resort after she was given a platform by Todd Blanche to just make things up. So, it's nothing new for them.
Užas.
And it's so profound that no matter how many times they're wronged, how many times they're re-victimized, how many times some of the most powerful people in the country, like Pam Bondi, can disrespect them.
Ne znam vi koji pratite ova nepravda vrišti do neba. Ova djeca zlostavljana, ubijena, silovana, platit ćete za to, Bog će vas, satraće vas, satro vas Bog Jahve sve mogući.
They still continue to fight. So they're frustrated, they're angry, but as you've seen, and as I think the public has seen for the last, couple of years or so, the more angry and the more disrespect they get, the stronger they get, and the more they're going to continue to fight.
I'm so glad to hear that, because it's so alarming how disrespectful she was in that hearing. And when they raised their hand, all the people who had not been contacted. And it's my understanding now that other countries, obviously the DOJ, they came out and said, we're done, hands off, we're done. You have other countries now launching investigation and asking for witnesses to come forward. Do you, as an attorney for these survivors,
Zašto su slova ovako?
does that give you some optimism that justice will come? It just won't be from the United States?
It certainly gives me optimism, and I don't want to lose sight of the progress that these survivors have made, even in the United States, right? We are a long way to go, and the way the DOJ has handled this is just atrocious. However, they did get these documents released. It was very clear, and I would have said maybe 5-6 months ago, I would have said, no way. This administration wants this story to go away. They are never going to give in. But because of the fight of the survivors, they convinced Congressmen, they convinced almost the entirety of Congress, almost unanimous. They got the Senate, they even got Trump to sign it. I mean, this Epstein Transparency Act. So I don't want to lose sight, because there has been a lot of progress from the prosecutors, but it's clear from the Department of Justice that there's going to be no real criminal liability from the United States. So yes, we are optimistic that we're seeing some of the other, other countries, actually take this seriously, actually take a pro-survivor approach to this, which is in stark contrast to the way the United States has handled it. So yeah, there is some optimism. Of course, myself and my clients will absolutely be, participating in any lawful investigation, any criminal investigation that, that transpires, whether it's in the United States or abroad. We want justice, and we're not going to stop until we get it.
Let me ask you, how can you put pressure on the Department of Justice moving forward? Because there seems to be, like you said, because of the groundswell of support for releasing the documents, 3 million approximately documents have been released, but you have a whole another 3 million that have yet to be released. They're still covering up perpetrators' names while allowing victims' names to be unredacted. So how do you, as an attorney for the survivors, put pressure on the Department of Justice?
It's a great question. I think the answer is to continue doing what they did and continue doing what everyone has done to get to this point. Remember, there was a strong fight to ever release any of these documents. It took a lot of work. It took a bill to be passed, like an actual bill, to go through Congress, to go through the Senate, to get signed by the president, to get these files released. That was a lot of pressure, and that was an enormous feat for the survivors and for the those who have advocated for the survivors. So my answer to that is to continue to do what we've been doing, but amplify it up. Continue to call your congressperson. Continue to call your representative. Continue to raise the voices of the survivors. Don't let this story go silent. The administration is going to do everything they can do to try to distract, to try to put this story to bed, as they've been trying to do for the last 6 months or so. Don't let it die. Continue to advocate, raise the voices of the survivors. Trust, the survivors. Believe women. Believe these survivors, and be an advocate for them, because they're trying to drown out their voices. You saw Pam Bondi couldn't even acknowledge their existence. That's sort of a good, almost microcosm for the entire way this administration has treated these victims. Don't let them push them away. Continue to advocate. Continue to fight. Continue to do interviews like these. Continue to put advocates for the Epstein survivors. And for just justice and common sense justice, keep amplifying those voices. And I think hopefully that pressure will continue to mount, and we'll make more change, and we'll get true, exposure, accountability, and then ultimately closure for the survivors.
Can you sue the Department of Justice for the failure to prosecute, or what are your remedies against the Department of Justice?
So we're looking into all of those remedies right now, and I've had a lot of meetings internally at my law firm with our clients, and trying to explore every avenue of suing the Department of Justice for what, for the catastrophe that this has been, suing district attorney's office, the FBI. The problem is the federal government gets to make the laws as to how the federal government gets sued. And it's not a simple task. There's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of yellow tape. There's a lot of delays, filing claims. There's a lot of red tape. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to stop it. It's not a deterrence to us. However, I think Congress and the people who are already in power have a quicker and better avenue for that type of thing than we do. Holding contempt hearings, filing lawsuits themselves, getting judges to oversee this. We're going to pursue every single remedy, we can, but I think it needs to be a group effort with the survivors, the survivors' attorneys, and Congress, because the federal government puts a lot of red tape in the way of, lay people suing the federal government for, say, failing to prosecute or using their discretion. It's very difficult, and there's a lot of immunity the government has.
Tako je. I vas ćemo tužiti u Hrvatskoj isto. Međunarodni sud za ljudska prava, ne poštujete dječja prava, štitite pedofile.
And we're continuing, as more and more information is revealed, continuing to consider and investigate certain lawsuits. Obviously, we are finding out, like I said earlier, there is some optimism here. There has been progress. We are seeing some names. We are seeing names that were previously, secret, revealed as possible co-conspirators, as possible, financiers of Jeffrey Epstein. And, we're investigating to see where those people knew whether they should have known what they were financing. It's important to remember that despite what Alex Acosta did in 2008, or what he didn't do, he did make Jeffrey Epstein a registered sex offender. That was public. So I think anyone who after 2008 continued to socialize closely with Jeffrey Epstein, continued to finance him, continued to just associate with him in a very close manner, knew or should have known that they were associating, funding, financing, socializing with a registered sex offender who was continuously surrounded by young girls. So I think those people have a lot of questions to answer. And as more and more names and more information are revealed, we are absolutely investigating, very specific people and looking into potential civil lawsuits.
Okay, I have a question that I've had since this whole, we're going to release the names. When Pam Bondi first came in, she was going to release all of it. Then she said, oh, there is none. And then you find out they want to interview Ghislaine Maxwell, but they don't want to interview the victims. What are the victims able to create a list and release a list of perpetrators publicly, like come together?
Sve javno.
You have a dozen clients. They put, all the names on a list and release that. What are the perils for them in doing that?
Yeah.
And is that something that you would consider?
So, good, great question. So we'll start with the perils. The perils are that if they release names accusing them of sex trafficking or sexual abuse or anything related to that, they could very well get sued by those very powerful people. And my line of work, what I do as a career is I represent typically very powerful,
tuži da dokažem da si to što jesi.
And sort of the playbook recently for
Šta se
powerful men
bojiš,
has been
čovječe?
to sue their accuser into oblivion. Non-stop lawsuits where the court's going to fine them $50,000, who cares, for a frivolous lawsuit. They're going to continue to do it and do it and do it. And if you give them an inch, they're going to take that inch and they're going to sue.
Nećete vi tužit više nikog, smradovi.
In trend, if you will,
Ne. Slab tužbe, ne.
On behalf of my advocacy for my clients all the time, my clients have been sued. It's very ugly. Now we take it, but it's ugly. And I think there's a fear when these women do not have the resources of, say, these very, and now we can see how powerful men.
Ništa, nisu moćni od Boga.
Truth is a defense to defamation, but that doesn't mean you don't have to hire a lawyer.
Nisu jači od Boga.
You spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal fees, and it's not pleasant to be sued. So that's one of the deterrents. The other, not say a deterrent is, it's a fair question, of course, because the women, likely do have this information, but I think the pressure on them to
Ma stisnite ih žene za jaja, stisnite ih čovječe da neće znat kak se zovu.
Possession of these names. It's not as if it's just the survivors who know. Clearly, there's names redacted in very suspicious, very salacious emails. We know the DOJ has basically admitted that they have redacted names of potential co-conspirators. We've seen the names redacted. So it's the burden of the Department of Justice. It's the Department of Justice, right? This is not the Department of defending Trump. This is not the Department of keeping Jeffrey Epstein files secret. This is the Department of Justice. They should be the ones who are advocating for the survivors. They should be the ones who are releasing these names. They should be the ones pursuing justice, not the ones depriving the survivors of justice.
Ista u Hrvatskoj.
I completely agree. It's such another huge burden to put on these survivors. Okay, one last thing. Ghislaine Maxwell. She has that long interview with Todd Blanche.
Yeah.
Transferred to cushy country club Fed.
Yeah.
And then goes into Congress to the Oversight Committee and takes the fifth and says she will only release information with clemency, if she is granted clemency.
Biti tražila pomilovanje, nema šanse.
I am sick of hearing from Ghislaine Maxwell. I think that Todd Blanche quote-unquote interview was a re-victimization of the survivors, but giving someone who's been accused of perjury, given someone who is a convicted child sex trafficker, one of the most heinous crimes we have here in the United States, convicted child sex trafficker, convicted of tricking 14-year-old girls to get into Jeffrey Epstein's orbit because she knew that he was going to rape them ultimately. So she is a despicable person, and she did not deserve a platform. She does not even really deserve to be spoken about. I was appalled by that whole thing, and what's even more appalling is that Donald Trump has not ruled it out. You would think any common sense with Donald Trump would be asked, are you considering a clemency or pardon? Any reasonable human being would say, of course not. She's a convicted child sex trafficker. What kind of insane person would consider a pardon for that? So that's even more appalling that it hasn't been ruled out. There was even hope that she felt confident enough that she could even request that. So I guess short answer, long answer to your question is really just sort of appalled by anything that has to do with Ghislaine Maxwell these days. In my opinion, she deserves to be rotting behind bars in a maximum security prison where convicted child sex traffickers belong.
Well, and wasn't she also convicted of perjury?
She was accused of perjury, and then I believe those were dropped because they ended up pursuing the other charges, the more serious charges of child sex trafficking. So they chose not to pursue the perjury charges as well after they convicted her of child sex trafficking. But she has been accused in a court of law of perjury.
Okay, final question. As you move forward with these victims, what would justice look like for them?
Right. So it's really three things, I think, and I guess it's a lot, but you can narrow it down to three things. The first is exposure. The number one thing they've been advocating for is exposure. Not just Jeffrey Epstein, not a bunch of redacted names, certainly not their own names, because that's basically what the Department of Justice did. But exposure of everyone who facilitated, who enabled, who turned a blind eye, or at worst, co-abused with Jeffrey Epstein. Full exposure. Second comes accountability. Now, accountability can take a lot of forms. Of course, there's criminal accountability, that would be ideal. Civil accountability, or even you see some like societal accountability. You have seen, people lose their jobs, people resign, people sell their companies. There's been some real, what I call societal accountability. But they're really after criminal and civil liability. Then the third is closure. They'd really like to move on with their lives. As much as they advocate, and as much as they've been fighting, and they're going to continue to fight to keep this topic, in the news and keep it relevant, to keep more pressure. They would like closure. They'd like to move on for this. They would like to be able to turn on their phones or their TVs and not see Jeffrey Epstein's face or name every single time, and not that have to be their full identity anymore. They'd like closure, but they cannot have closure without accountability and justice, and they can't have the accountability and justice without exposure. So it needs to be all three, and it needs to be in that order: exposure, accountability, and closure. And I think that sums up really what this fight is all about for the survivors.
Odlično
I
rečeno.
agree, and thank you for sharing that. Please share our support with your clients, and as we move forward, obviously, we'd love to have you back as more things come to light, and best of luck to you in this mission. Thanks for being on.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.